Joining us on the Voice of Job Seekers. This is Mark Anthony Dyson. If you want to know more about me and what I do, you can go to voiceofjobseekers.com. Hopefully, you are doing well where you're at. Where I'm in Chicago, we're cold. Not particularly all that much fun, but it's kind of the things that is part of the package that you get when you live in the Midwest. Today, I wanted to bring on a guest, and you're going to have to pronounce your first name. I want to say Ghislaine.
That is perfect. You got it.
Oh, okay, Ghislaine
Gold
Knox.
star.
Good deal. And I think one of the things what we've never done, and I've never heard on any podcast at all, is somebody who is actually in the weeds in the HR space. They're
Okay.
not particularly the HR manager, but they
Correct.
kind of do all the things that the HR manager doesn't do.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
we're going to get really deep into that because I think at this particular time with people wondering, well, what's taking so long for hiring and why don't I get any, how can I know that I'm ever hired? Why is it taking so long between interviews? And we're getting all kinds of questions. So Ghislaine, we're going to probably get into some areas, and you could defer if we get into like secrets and stuff of the
Okay.
trade. But we want to uncover some of the secrets and some of the things that most people don't know. So,
Right.
uh, you're is it safe to say where you're from or where you're at right now?
I'm with a Fortune 100 company in financial services.
Good deal. Good deal. In the South, we'll keep it
Yes.
there.
It's in the warm south.
In the warm South, so we'll keep it there. Uh, One of the things that I think people are really concerned about is the time that it's taking hiring, and why is it so different than like 10 years ago when hiring really wasn't this perceived circus that seems to go on behind the scenes hiring. Maybe you could confirm it is still a circus, but just with different tricks, or maybe, uh, or maybe it's just something. The precautions are being taken now that they weren't taken back 10 years ago.
Absolutely. Well, first, I just want to say that any opinions that I share here are my own and not specific to my employer. So I can,
Understood.
okay, I will just base it off my experience. So I think it all depends on the industry that you are going into. There are some industries that are highly regulated, and there are a lot of hoops that you have to run through that are not specific to the employer. They're specific to that industry and they have to be done.
Mhm.
So, if you are going in financial services, there are additional criminal checks, there are additional databases that you would need to go into to, ensure that a candidate meets certain criteria versus if you're looking for a back end of a restaurant that's not as highly regulated. So I think that is one of the big factors as to why a background check can take long. Certain things like where a person has resided, if you are running a criminal check on someone and you've had 10 residences in the past 10 years in 10 different counties. You're required, or not required, but some employers choose to run all those criminal checks for all those addresses. And there's some counties that are particularly slow. I mean, I've seen up to a month, more than 30 days it takes to run a criminal check in a particular county. So some of this is outside of the employer's actual control. We just sit and wait and follow up daily and hope that the courts get back to us with that kind of information. So those are two top reasons that come to mind as to why the process can take a long time. And obviously,
Right.
another one just popped in. If a
Mhm.
candidate is not as responsive, takes a while to respond. You like leave a voicemail, you call and say, hey, something popped up here. I need more information. And they're like, oh, well, I'm on vacation for a week. I'll get back to you, when I'm back, instead of just saying, well, let me tackle this now. So candidate delays are also a big hiccup.
Okay. Now, is there any information you check before somebody actually gets into the interview, or is that all done after interviews and this person's been finalized as a potential candidate or the candidate that the company wants?
So I typically don't get involved until after the resume has been reviewed. A
Okay.
manager would meet with the candidate and, have a cursory interview. So they complete an application. And once the application is completed, that's pretty much where my back end of the process starts.
hmm So, and you're reviewing for everything from the actual application and you're checking the integral parts.
Correct. Yep. And again, like I said, that varies by industry, but typical things that you would see is, checking someone's employment history, making sure they left on good terms with their previous employer, that they worked the place that they said that they actually worked. We check their education to see essentially just to validate that they graduated from where they said that they graduated from. Like I said, criminal history as well. Industry specific. There are other websites that we're required to check where a person's history, licensing history, is public information. So you'd be able
Mhm.
to see, have they committed any offenses? Do they have any complaints, for example, against them for certain type of behaviors? So those are
Oh,
kind of things.
it's interesting to go back and
Mhm.
see because I think there's a lot of nuance to this because some companies look for when they check with the company, their former company of their former companies, to see
Right.
if they actually worked there. Is performance part of that check as well these days? Specifically, again, we're going with just your industry
Right, right.
right
Yeah.
now.
With what I have seen, a lot of the if you work for a larger company, it's typically an automated process. So you just go in and
Mhm.
they'll tell you most of the times like a person just worked at the company. And then every so often you'll see like some negative response. They're not eligible for rehire because they didn't give notice, or they wouldn't hire them again. And then in that instance, you have to reach out to the candidate and say, well, this is the information uncovered. Can you give me the circumstances about what led to your departure from the company?
Right. Does it matter these days? Again, I know you're speaking for your industry and people
Right.
you are connected with.
Mhm.
Do they care if that person, how they separated,
Uh,
perhaps? Go ahead.
no, absolutely. Yeah. 100%. If, you're looking, they'll say something like, okay, attendance, or they didn't give, 2 weeks notice. Those are more minor things to me than, you know,
Mhm.
I've seen things like terminated because ethics violation, for example.
Oh, I can
So
understand
yes,
that. Yeah, that would be a
yes, so
big
you would
one.
see that, and then performance. What we see a lot is performance not up to par, and that could be something similar. You're just not a right fit for
Pretty
that particular
subjective.
company. Yeah, so it's pretty simple. So unless there is something very negative behind that, that's not a deal breaker at all.
Do you dig deeper when you hear the performance, or basically, or you said it's automated, so they're answering. You're not actually talking to a person. You're just going off the feedback that you're getting from the
Right.
survey that
Yeah.
you sent to
In
them.
that instance, like I said, unless it's somebody with, and this is industry specific again, but if it's someone that has a public record attached to their licenses, their databases that you can check, and it'll tell you this person was discharged, and here's the reason why they were discharged. It could
Mhm.
be alleged forgery, someone's signature
Of
on an
course,
application. So,
integrity. Yeah,
exactly, integrity is a big thing.
yeah. Now, where people are curious about as well is references and what's
Mhm.
a good reference and what's a bad reference. And traditionally, having been a hiring manager a few rounds myself, is somebody that was your boss
Right.
mostly. Um, from what I hear, there's been some, shifting with that. It could be a boss, it could be somebody that was uh, actually didn't have necessarily uh, direct influence over the work, but they knew how that person worked.
Yes.
Uh, Perhaps you could give me on what, and your again with your expertise, what that looked like.
Right. Yeah. Well, this I would have to say is just based. it's not even based on the industry that I'm in because we don't do references. So that's one of
Oh,
those things where,
okay.
where someone, we do the employment search, and if something comes back
Right.
negative, then
R-
you do, a bit more due diligence there. But as in terms of references, that's not an area that's part of our background review. But I'd say absolutely that, it's important, and it doesn't necessarily have to be someone that supervised you. I mean, I would give a reference to peers in different departments that I work with because,
mhm.
they can speak for me. They've worked with me hand in hand. Am I a team player? Do I get things done? Do I procrastinate? So I think there's,
I laugh every time I hear team players. Like, what does that really even mean these days, right?
yes, I get that. That's a term that's thrown around.
Yeah, yeah, it's been thrown around for so long that everybody says that they're a team player,
Yes.
unless you really know someone who personally knows someone to say that this person really wasn't a team player. But I haven't
Yeah,
never heard that.
right. I've worked with some people that I would say would fall into that category. Everybody
Hmm.
tries to, you know, form an opinion and agree to something, and you'll have that one person that just stands by their opinions no matter what, and not necessarily in a good way. So,
Right,
not
right,
everybody.
right. Right, but that would be nothing you ever see, or nothing that you would ever stumble across in your reference checks, or any background checks
Correct. Right.
information.
Yep, that's accurate.
Okay, so what would you say would be one of the stranger things that has come up? And you don't have to give all of the dirt, but people be surprised. I mean, in my experience, there have been some surprises that's come out from both sides. As somebody I used to coach,
Mhm.
as well as I used to hire, and also had to let people go. One instance was when there was, and this I've seen it happen, and I've even heard it happening, that you have somebody who's an applicant, who's a final candidate, but their boss, who they were trying to get away with, was friends with the boss from another company.
Ah,
So
okay. That
and
didn't work out too
that
well.
that conversation didn't go real well.
Right.
So that's an extraordinary, but that's the time that we're living in, kind of, because we're living in a less than 6 degree of connection world here. You're 3 or 4 connections away from, especially if you're in the same industry. But
Right.
something like that, uh, is there something that people don't think about that maybe they should look at when they're thinking about who they should get reference, or why they need to maybe uh, be more forthright with some information, maybe ahead in the interview time?
Okay.
Maybe you could think of an instance or two.
Yeah, sure. But more specific to the application, I would say I've seen, for example, somebody would say that they were employed through June 2023, and then you check their application, you verify their employment, and it comes back that it was June 2022, or that's too close. That could be a typo. May 2022 or something. And you reach out and you say,
Mhm.
well, what's the reason for the discrepancy? You had this on your application, but the previous employer said otherwise. Oh, I thought it would look bad for me not having
Mm.
employment for a year. So I chose to lie instead. I mean, I don't know why
Yeah,
you would think that would look more favorable, but I mean, I've
right,
gotten that response.
right.
Or, I didn't know how to put that I was unemployed on the application, so I just extended the date to make it work. Like
Yeah,
those are the
yeah.
things that you kind of look at and you have to say, really?
Well, an anomaly like that usually ends up being a no-go altogether, because
Exactly.
because
Unless, I mean, you talk to someone, and unless you can really get a vibe for a person and say, oh, I really think this person is being upfront with me. They didn't know you could put a tab on an application that said unemployed. So they couldn't proceed without having all dates filled. So
right.
I wouldn't say that would always be a no-go. It's kind of like a person-specific thing. If there's a track record, a lot of things aren't lining up, like their education. They said they graduated from college, but they didn't. They have these employment hiccups, et cetera, et cetera.
It's interesting how those very same things that could happen to somebody in terms of, and I'll use this term in the sense of not being disrespectful, but somebody in the rank and file. as opposed to people who are on executive level can actually have the same thing because it is human nature, right?
Right.
Integrity is no, you either have it or you don't in the case of employment, because you really get one shot to tell the truth. Then
Exactly.
after that it kind of rolls. But do you see that there's uh, maybe a difference in what's considered and what's not considered between the two?
Can you clarify that a little for me? I'm
In
not
other
quite
words,
sure. Yeah.
somebody in the rank and file, he says that his education, he graduated in 85 when he really graduated in 82. That may make him look older, as opposed to somebody who's an executive or senior manager or director level, may have done the same thing. Are they looked at the same?
In terms of my industry, yes, I would say that they are looked at the same, but I would say that's again something minor. I mean, if you graduated in 1982 and you put 1985, I mean, I can't even remember when I graduated, and it's not that long ago. So I could see something like that just being minor. Did you get a degree? Is more important than the year you
Well,
graduated.
we're using the degree, but I'm sure it also depends on what they like. If they said, well, for instance, maybe a position was it if I was the director of a department versus I was really the assistant director of a department,
Okay.
would that be kind of an anomaly?
Yeah, that's something I would say that's something more on a minor scale as well, but that's definitely something we
Okay.
look out for. And again, it would be, did they verify I'm a trainee? And I said I'm a manager of people, versus an
Mhm.
assistant versus a director, like a director's assistant, for example.
Right, right, right. So, really, what often gets again, and you've already stated, ethics is a big part of it.
Right,
Integrity is a big part of it, and those are kind of are pretty important to find out. As you in your industry specifically,
right.
that that's everything.
Yes, absolutely.
So these days, if you would look at hiring again, just comparing 10 years sample, and for some reason you may not be able to remember the amount of detail from
Okay.
10 years ago, and I understand it. I don't either.
Right.
But in as far as do you feel like maybe there's a little bit more time being taken these days as opposed to back about 10 years ago? And I know it's per person, but a lot of
Right.
people feel the weight of the time more than any time else. And I've heard even recruiters and other hiring managers say that why is this taking as long as it is? Uh, Maybe you can add some insight as far as what you experience in the weeds, so to speak.
Right. Yeah, I have seen in some areas. I have seen, at least for the past 10 years, where employment processes have been streamlined. So things
Mhm.
that used to take a long time aren't taking as long. But then there are other areas that are outside the employer's control that are taking very long. We reach out to verify previous employers, those that don't have an automated service, for example, and you hear they're understaffed. So they'll take a long time to get the information that you need back, and you have to follow up for several days to try and get the information that you need. Or again, with the courts and the criminal checks, they don't
Mhm.
have, they're understaffed. Some of them say that they haven't caught up yet, even from COVID.
Mhm.
Their staff's not what it used to be, and so that's not their priority right now. They're doing their essential duties first, and then they're dealing with things like giving a criminal report for an employer.
Right. Now, that's an interesting part that you mentioned the courts. And again, I don't think most people even talk about or consider where how those the criminal background check even plays a part, because I know everybody has varied histories from traffic tickets to something they've done as a minor and what actually will show up.
Right.
And of course, we know the more serious offenses is definitely going to show up if there's a court case.
Mhm.
Um, there there was a time when, and this is a story from my experience and checking someone's background, I decided, even back, and this was before 2010, I decided to check someone's, because I knew of the line of people that they came from. I decided to check, who the person was and who their parents was. That might have been a little bit illegal, but I was just curious because I didn't mention it to anyone,
Right.
and it showed up a whole court file. It went
Oof.
straight to a court file.
Mhm.
It did, there wasn't you didn't have to go through the website, anything. The document was right there in the web. And I was just in shock. I said, "No, I'm staying out of this." But having said that, though, you know, instances where um, there might be some juggling between whether or not you should hire someone based on a criminal background and what is considered uh, something where you wouldn't hire them. I mean, other than they're going to be carrying money around in money bags.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think a lot has to do with trust, for example. And again, depending on the industry that you're in,
Mhm.
if you are going out to your employees going out to someone's home and they'll be, working inside that home, do you want to hire somebody that has, a felony theft charged?
Mhm.
That puts your company's reputation at risk and also opens you up for potential lawsuits, knowing that you hired this person that has this record and could potentially, do it again.
Mm.
So
Okay.
I think, yeah, I think it all depends on if you had a misdemeanor for a DUI when you were in college. Is something like that is minor compared to the major offenses, and where your employee will be going and what exactly will they be doing? Will they be sitting behind a desk just calling people all day and having limited interaction with people versus somebody that's, like I said, out there in like a face of the public, so to speak.
Okay. In your industry, do you do social media background checks as well?
Not, I know that there are areas in the company that do that, but not from the get go during the background process.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Just curious,
Okay.
because I always wondered. To me, and I've had several discussions even on the podcast about it. It used to be a time when people would do social media uh, background checks last, like 2008, 2009. And a lot more companies are doing them more upfront now,
Right.
where they're doing them more towards the front end now. And, I think that so people have to understand that that depends on the business and the business need. There's no
Exactly.
broad brush that we can paint
Right.
with that. Okay, that's good. And I want to tell people who've been watching, appreciate it. It's kind of quiet in the chat at the moment, but I see that there's some eyes on us, so that's a good thing. Um, it, what's the most challenging thing right now for those in your area are facing that seems to, maybe you're not losing sleep, but it is a concern.
Um, are you talking in terms of like the background reviews that I'm doing? What
Right,
challenges
right.
are we seeing
Uh-huh.
there? Yeah, well,
Yeah.
like I said, things are taking, in some instances, things are taking a lot longer than they used to. And that's
Hmm.
having to rely on other people, other outside people to get the information that you need to do your background checks is, something that causes significant delays and for the process and for us because that's completely outside of our control.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. That is yeah, it seems like nobody really has a definitive answer, but I understand too that if we look at, you know, where in some industries, supply and demand of everything is backed up in a
Right.
sense.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I said, it
It-
also depends on how intense your background, intense of a background check you're running on someone. So are
right,
you just doing something?
especially with digital and how the internet is and how things are stored and how things are processed.
Right.
Because not everybody's automated, like,
Yes,
like
exactly. You could have you
every-
could have that one person doing hiring and they're doing recruiting and they're doing the
Mhm.
onboarding versus having a designated unit that just specifies like just specializes, I'm sorry, in that particular area.
Right. Thanks, Preston, for this question. It's something that we already answered, but it is something that I think people hear a lot about social media and uh, what perhaps we could talk a little bit about the weight of social media and who plays in hiring, not so much if you do it, but the weight that it may carry in making a difference between being hired and not being hired. It used to be once upon a time if somebody was drunk at a party and somebody took the picture that they'd be out automatically. I think those days we kind of passed that and matured a little bit past that. But
Right. Yeah.
maybe you could give us an idea of what may be uh, some things that you may have seen. You don't have to disclose any,
Right.
uh, you know, private information, but an example would be good to know.
Yeah, no, unfortunately, like I said, that's not an area that I'm involved with at all during the
Right,
background. That's an entirely different unit. So I've
right.
never seen it run. I don't know what's involved in it. I can, obviously tell you if somebody's out there on Twitter and they're throwing out hate speech, then that's obviously not the kind of person that you would want working
Mhm.
for you.
Right,
You just
right.
have to be very careful with the things that you say once you're out there. You said the internet is forever. Once it's seen, it can't be unseen.
Yeah, yeah. I think, yeah, I think a lot of people forget that
Yes.
that part of it. Uh,
Absolutely.
Anything we should know about right now about if there is anything coming as far as technology that may make background checks a little bit better or
Not as
smoother?
right. Yeah. I've not heard of anything in the woodworks right now, but like I said, in the past 10 years, I've seen 10, 15 years, I've seen the processes improve a lot from somebody sitting there manually looking at applications and having to sit there and make the phone calls and do the outreaches themselves versus the automated process that pretty much does everything now for us. So, and I would not be surprised with AI evolving as it is that that being used in the near future if it's probably not already to speed up the process.
Yeah, and I think everybody's afraid of that. AI is going to get better. I mean, right now it's still a beta project in many ways, uh, and it's at the beginning. But it's better to get it beginning to find out how complicated it becomes comparatively later on. So
Correct.
that's a good note to make. Anything else you want to add before we wrap it up? I think we hit a lot of the high points where I've seen people have questions and concerns.
Right. Well, first, I just want to thank you for having me here. It's been a pleasure to share my opinions with you. But I
Sure.
also want to say that I've seen on LinkedIn, for example, a lot of people are saying that people aren't hiring out there and, the difficulties that they've had getting a job. But there are some industries that are continually hiring. They're always looking for people. So,
Mhm.
you may want to consider looking outside of your current industry if you're not having any success with that. And I've seen a lot of successful people that have pivoted completely changing careers.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a matter of finding, just having a good grasp of what skills are that
Yes.
makes the real money for you and to
Right.
see what
Exactly.
and to see where those skills fit in other industries. There could
Yes.
be 3, 4, 5 others, which could give you more options. Is
Right.
something I've been saying for a long time is, staying in one lane doesn't give you the whole view of the whole city,
Yes.
for
There you go. I
sure.
like that.
So if people wanted to get a hold of it's okay that they connect with you on LinkedIn.
Yes, absolutely. Happy to
Okay.
answer any questions or connect.
Yeah, yep, and of course. And again, there's only so much you're going to be able to give people an idea, but I think people have a better understanding now of what the hiring process it looks like.
Okay.
There is something that I will ask, and this wasn't uh, on the table
Okay.
at first, but I know a lot of people get this idea of the automation, the applications, and they get all of that mixed up. Um, how do you receive applications to get it? You get it basically from the hiring manager. You're not getting it from a machine or automated machine.
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
Yep. They review the
I,
resume and they fill out an application online, and they let us know the person's ready for a background check, and it gets queued into our system, and we start working it from there.
Good deal. Good deal. Just want to be sure I asked that question as well.
Okay.
There were a couple of really good comments. Just want to point out um, Felicia, thank you very much for commenting. She says great content, especially regarding the streamline of the background process. And don't forget, folks, this is just one type of background processes. It doesn't
Right.
cover it all, but the intricacies will probably be very similar, just depending upon how it falls into the
Correct.
company's
Hmm.
policies and procedures. And of course, uh, there was an agreement here saying, Felicia says, yes, pivoting skill set to new industries is a real big one. And people be surprised where their skill sets are in other industries. I think people don't do enough of the due diligence and the research that it takes. It takes some time, and better to do it while you're employed than when you're unemployed. If you're unemployed, you're on somebody else's clock. You're on the clock that you don't want to be on. But while you're
Right.
employed, you should try to get an idea of what other industries you can fit in, and you get in where you could fit in. So that
Exactly.
will do it for us. Ghislaine, thank you very much for joining me. And if people again want to know more about you, they can contact you on LinkedIn. Just connect with you through the post, or they can look to this video, and they can see your information, know how to spell your name. It's not a traditional name
Correct.
per se, and that's not a bad thing either.
Yes.
And just to remind everybody, we'll probably have maybe one other episode for the rest of this year. As you know, I also have another podcast called the Job Scam Report. We'll have one coming up on December 9th at 9 a.m. Central. So a lot of you have been uh, joining us live for that event, and it's wild, uh, to say the least. But it's great because we're getting an idea of how to help people and to give the advice that you need to help them navigate this areas of scams and fraud and impostership. So thank you again. And if you've been reading the ticker, also you can you can get a free guide, and I tell you how to do that on the ticker as well. So thank you very much for joining me. Peace in the Valley of Love. You've been listening to the Voice of Job Seekers. You can go to voice